So Ryan, it's really good news. We've had some subscribers to the new YouTube channel, the
Right.
Intuitive Farmer.
Glad to
So
hear it.
we haven't had many comments, but somebody said on YouTube they didn't realize how handsome I was.
I still have not realized how handsome you are. And I've been looking at you for years. So we can't blame our YouTube audience for that.
Yeah, no, I'm only joking. Nobody's actually made a comment like that at all. So, but there you go. You can if you wish.
That's right.
Just don't say the opposite. So, yeah, if you want to see the podcast live or recorded anyway, then just go to YouTube. We'll put a link in the show notes. And the only other thing I would ask you to do is if you get a chance to do a review, that would really help us. That obviously helps with the algorithms and pushes up the various different league tables, etc. And Ryan and I always like listening to your comments. So yeah, that would be wonderful. But today we're going to talk a bit about a depressing subject, but the silver lining in the
Right.
cloud, which is why what with a recession potentially already happening in the States, certainly one looking to happen lots of other places, including England, then is there an upside of recession? And actually it's as I've been preparing for this, I've been thinking, yeah, there's quite a few upsides, aren't there?
Yeah. Plenty of bad news to be had about a recession. We don't want to minimize that. But yeah, okay. Are there any upsides that we can look to provide a little hope, a little silver lining, as you say? So
Yeah.
no, I'm excited to hear your list, Colin.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think the first thing to say is that um, this is normal. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm old enough now to go, oh, it's another recession, and so it's not like it's suddenly new. Um, and obviously this has come about as a sort of a byproduct of COVID, and then screwing up all the supply demand cycles, and then we've had there was a pent up demand, and then we've had all of the war in Ukraine, and that disturbing all the cycle, disturbing food and energy and everything else, and that's all caused inflation, and blah 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 blah. And we all know it because we're all feeling it, I guess, at the moment, which is the not so good side of it. Um, but it's I think it's interesting when you start thinking about a recession. The way I would liken it too is it's a bit like wildfires.
Hmm.
So in Florida where I am at the moment, and you can tell because I have the fishes in the background.
That's right.
Um, so they used to suppress the wildfires here, and now they have a controlled burn. And why am I telling you that? I'm telling you that because I think the analogy is actually a good one, which is they've discovered that actually by doing a controlled burn, it's actually better for the environment because effectively that's what's happened over centuries. Yeah. It's only when man came in and started going, oh no, we obviously don't want the devastation of the wildfires that do occur, and obviously they are terrible. But if there's some way of controlling those wildfires, and then that's so much so the better. And I guess that's what a lot of the central banks try to do, isn't it? They try to control inflation and therefore recessions, and try to make the peaks or the troughs not as high.
Yeah, there is a cycle to the business cycle, and it feels like economies just naturally need to contract sometimes in addition to growing. And I think that's you're right. That's what central banks have been trying to do, and largely have been relatively successful in doing for the past 80 or 90 years. But that does mean that occasionally there need to be these contractions, and that can
Yeah.
be healthy in the long term for economies, even if in the short term it can be very painful for those of us living through it.
So
So,
what's the healthy side of things? And I think the obvious one for me is, as I've looked into this, is basically the weak die. and it's a time of change. And I think the interesting bit for me is that, you know, in good times, it's easy to go, you know, times are good, we're making money, we don't have to worry about things. And the danger is that you get complacent, don't you? Um, but in bad times, those the organizations that are fat, that are inefficient, that are, you know, not doing as well internally, I get found out, don't they?
Yeah, there's a great Warren Buffett quote that says, "It's only when the tide goes out that you learn who's been swimming naked." And it's exactly this idea. When things are clipping along and growth is easy, it can lead to a lot of inefficiencies in the way that companies are run. And so, yeah, these occasional stress shocks can reorder economies towards kind of more efficient companies and better ways of doing things. From a psychological standpoint, we tend to be risk averse when things are going well, but we
Yeah,
tend to be more risk seeking when we're in the domain of losses, when things are going poorly, or when uh, there's these negative outcomes.
sure.
And to the extent that risk is necessary for growth, you know, these recessions can also change the way that companies are managed over short periods of time, and sometimes that can also have positive outcomes.
Yeah, I mean, I think the phrase that I've always loved is a necessity. No, what is it? Is it?
Necessity is the mother of invention.
Thank you.
Yeah,
This is why you're a professor and I'm just
that's
a
right.
nobody.
That was actually the extent of my PhD thesis, was just being able to come up with that one quote on
All
demand, and
right,
they
there
gave
you
me a
go.
PhD. Yeah,
Well, mine was too many cooks spoil the broth,
there you
but
go.
I wasn't training to be a cook or anything. I just happened to like it. But no, but absolutely, you know, necessity is the mother of invention. So when times are good, you, as you say, you tend not to be as willing to take on the risks. But when your back's against the wall, that's when you suddenly start going, well, maybe we should try this because I guess it's not going to be any worse than doing anything else, is it?
That's right. We have to do something. So, and again, not to minimize, these are our benefits at the level of the economy as a whole.
Yes.
It's very hard if you're the one with your back up against the wall and needing to try different things. But yes, these are kind of some of the I do like your metaphor of the controlled burn, right? These are some healthy aspects of a changing economy if they can be controlled.
But I also think, mate, that whilst I clearly nobody wants to be made redundant or whatever it may be, okay, but I do think it is about the way that you look at things,
Yeah,
okay, because even from a personal perspective, sometimes when you're pushed out of a job, longer term, it's good news
yeah,
because that was the thing that that made you again you becoming complacent, you become you become the not fat and lazy, but you become complacent is just a good word to use, to be honest with you. And there have been lots of occasions where I've known people who have gone on to do extremely well when they've either been in a recession or gone into or have been made redundant or whatever, and have gone on to go, you know what? What's the thing that I've always wanted to do? It's start my own business, and therefore I'm going to start to do that now. And
yeah.
so I think for me, it's a mindset thing.
I mean, it's a great point. I mean, I was laid off when I was early in my career, and it was a formative experience. And I can't bring myself to say that that I'm grateful for it,
Sure.
but it was a part of the path that brought me to where I am now, and I'm extremely grateful for being where I am now. So,
Yeah.
yeah, the sometimes bad stuff happens, and we can only control what we can control about it, and a lot of that is deciding the attitude or the mindset that we're going to take
Yeah.
from this
And there
point
was a
forward.
phrase I learned the other day, which I thought was a really good phrase, which is breakthroughs come from breakdowns.
Hmm.
And I thought, yeah, that's really true. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Institutionalization sometimes also comes from breakdowns, but yeah, also breakthroughs too. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
no, I mean,
what?
obviously, nothing in life that's worthwhile happens without struggle and difficulty. So,
Sure, sure. And it's in that, for me, is some of the adversity. Just, it's that, again. Maybe we should change the name of this podcast into how many quotes we can put in to any one thing. But I've even forgotten what the bloody quote was now that I was just about to tell you. But I'm sure it'll come back to me at some point. Yeah.
there was
But
something
oh
by
yeah,
Oscar Wilde.
yes, I'm sure it was. And therefore, some of the opportunity, I think, again becomes, that when an organization is doing well, trundling along, getting the average growth, because it masks all of those things, again, to come up with another quote, it's that classic one of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah.
Whereas a recession makes you go, actually, we should get now. We need, we're being exposed in those areas. We now need to definitely go in and fix that, don't we?
Yeah.
There's a guy called Charles Handy. I don't know if you know. He's an old business guru from the UK from about 20 years ago, and he wrote a really good book called The Empty Raincoat. And one of the things that he talks about in that book is that people go through change. Okay, if you think of sports teams, if you think of politicians, if you think of companies, then like we were talking about here, that you got that sort of business cycle. And this is one of the advantages of YouTube, because you can now see me drawing pictures with my finger. But you can imagine a classic sort of S curve. Yeah. What he talks about is the fact that, when organizations or politicians or sports teams start, then everything's going really well and they're on this big growth curve. And then at some point it gets to the top. And then typically what happens is it goes over the top and it starts coming down the other side of that curve.
Mm-hmm.
And then he talks about the fact that when you get halfway down that curve, typically what happens is, the CEO gets sacked
Yep.
and somebody comes in and they put change in place, and it takes a while for it to take effect, but up it starts going the other side. Yeah. Um, and I use this a lot when I'm running workshops and stuff. So the interesting question is always, where are you?
Mm-hmm.
Where are you, your organization, or where is your sports team? So if you think about, if you think about my sports team, Luton Town Football Club, okay, we used to be in the Premiership just when it was formed. In fact, I think we came out of it just the year before it was formed. And we went all the way down to the conference, and now we've started to go up to we're in the Championship, which is the league below the Premiership. If you think about politicians, they have a high approval rating at the beginning when they get voted in, and then it goes down, and hopefully it goes up. Yeah. But the interesting bit becomes the question of, where are you? So are you at the bottom of this big curve? Yeah. And there's lots of growth left. Are you at the top and just about to come over the other side? Have you just gone over the other side? Yeah. And effectively things are starting to get bad and you're seeing things go down, or are you, halfway down and it's starting to plummet? And I guess the reason I'm mentioning that is because that's really interesting to start to recognize. When you're in a recession, so do you think that the market's going to carry on going, or where do you think to change? Because Handy talks about the fact that the time to change is at the top of the curve.
Right.
Yeah. Not
Rather than
when things are going wrong,
right.
i.e., halfway down.
Choosing to
And
change
yet,
rather than waiting until change is forced upon you.
correct. And
Yeah.
then you move on to that next level of that curve. Yeah. And the way I would tying this into customer experience, the way I would talk about that would be that you are thinking about all the rational parts of your experience. Okay. And then suddenly you get to the point where you can't really do any more and you're going to go over the top.
Mm-hmm.
And the next level is actually the next level of thinking. So embracing that emotional behavioral science part, because that actually leads you on to move to that top level. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But here's the issue for me, is that most organizations, we get most calls to go in and help organizations. Well, let me ask you, where do you think we get most calls to go in and help
I would think
organizations?
are on the downward slope, I assume.
Correct.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And here's the irony. It's the worst time.
Yeah.
Why? Because you don't have the resources.
Yeah.
Because actually the best people have left you. You haven't got as much budget. You've got more. I have to say, you've got the only advantage is you've got more motivation
Right.
to change.
People
Yeah,
realize there's a need to change.
yeah. There's a need to change, and the problem at the top of the curve that organisations have, and again, we've worked with organisations that are there, is convincing people that yes, it's good at the moment, but it's not going to remain good. Now, showing I'm totally not getting off subject. I think that is the same thing that is within a recession, isn't it? You know, that when times are going well, everyone's going, well, I don't see the need to make this change. But in a recession, it suddenly exposes all those things, and it is an opportunity. I always see it as an opportunity to actually start to put some new thinking in place for the reasons that you articulated earlier, which is, people are going to be more amenable to new thinking at that point, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, you say that the only advantage you have is the motivation component, but we shouldn't discount that. That's a major hurdle for change in a
Yeah.
lot of organizations. And so, yeah, it would be better if you had the motivation and the resources available and the best talent available. But to a certain extent, motivation within the organization for change might be the single most important asset. And so if that's what you've got now that the recession is coming on, grab a hold of that and use it while you can.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and that's where I think that a recession is a good thing, and I've always thought, and let me be clear,
Yep.
I don't want people to go away and thinking Colin loves recessions. I don't. Yeah, I wish they didn't happen, but there are
Well, you
some.
you love the Luton Town Football Club, so maybe just Colin loves pain, just all around. Recessions, Luton Town, just all the
Yes,
pain.
it is. Yes, just give me more pain. I love it. But the if you've got to have a recession, then for me, it's about turning around and saying, so here's the upside of this. It
Yeah.
is a good opportunity um, to. So here's another example that I just will articulate what I was just stumbling over. Um, so many organisations, and I think you may have heard me say this before. So let me tell you this story. Do you remember I've told you the story about the racing driver, car driver?
Uh,
No.
it
So,
doesn't ring a bell.
okay. So I was watching once a film from the
Oh, okay.
1960s.
Yeah.
Do you remember?
Uh-huh.
Anyway, I'll tell everybody else because we've had so many new listeners that they wouldn't have heard me talk about this one. So I was watching a film once, but from the 1950s, 1960s of Formula One racing drivers. and these two drivers were going around the track. One was ahead, one was behind, and then the first guy span out and basically died. Okay. And then after the guy that was in second obviously then went on to win the race, and he was being interviewed after the accident, or after the race, and basically the journalist said to him, "Well, when you saw the accident, did you slow down?" And he said, "No." He said, "I didn't slow down. I actually sped up." He said, "Because I knew everybody else would slow down." Yeah. Now, what's the point I'm trying to make? When you hit a recession, typically what people, and I'm already starting to see this with some organizations, typically what people cut back on are some of the, along with training and various different other things, but a focus on improving their customer experience. And I think an upside of a recession can be, is being able to say, no, everybody else is going to do that. We're not going to. And therefore, we're going to, put our foot down on the accelerator and actually use this as an opportunity to improve our experience. But that does take commitment from on high.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, you and I have had similar conversations when we talk about companies that pursue best practices.
Yep.
But there can be a lot of kind of group think and follower thinking in businesses. When if you really want to have breakout successes, you need to be doing something different than your competitors are doing. And so if everybody's moving like a school of fish in one direction, then, in response to a recession, for example, is this an opportunity for you to zig when others are zagging and, grab some initiative by doing something different?
Yeah. And therefore, I guess that comes partly back into understanding what your customers are looking for, and also understanding the things that are going to drive value for them as well, isn't it?
Yep.
But I guess it's those old industries that are the ones that are, I guess, due for disruption, isn't it? And that's where some of the more small, nimble organisations in a recession can start to really take place. And I think a number of entrepreneurs have got used the recession to get a niche hold in an industry and actually change things up.
Yep. Yeah. On a previous episode when we've talked about the recession, I had pulled up a list of successful companies that had started during a recession, and it's a formidable list. A lot of very successful companies started or expanded rapidly during recessions. It's a time of
Yep.
change.
No, absolutely. So let's do our usual bit. What's the practical advice? What advice would you give any organization going into a recession?
Well, let's start with the personal, and then we can get to the organizational. I think it's
Yep.
similar advice for both. There are things in life we can control and things that we can't.
Yep.
Despite Colin's love of pain, I don't think very many people are actually rooting for a recession.
No.
But recessions sometimes happen. And so the question is, how are we going to deal with it? As we've said, nobody hopes to be laid off. Nobody hopes to be made redundant. But if we find ourselves in that position, what is it that we can do at that point going forward? And so I think.
Can I interrupt? Can I interrupt
Please,
you for a moment
please.
and tell you one
You're
of
going to
the?
interrupt to lay me off? Is this your opportunity to make me redundant? We've got two people on this podcast, Ryan. I realize we only need one.
I never thought about that, but that is a hidden opportunity. I never really thought about that. But the manager of Luton, you'd have heard me say this before. The manager of Luton used to say, "Control the controllables."
Yeah.
And I thought that's a great way of summing up your point, which
Yeah,
is
it is.
you got to control the things.
So
that you
what
can
are the
control.
things that we can control? And to Colin's earlier point, a lot of it is attitude and mindset. There's some great research in psychology that backs up the idea that, in fact, I think there's even like a German word for it, like one of those super long, complicated German words. But when we're looking for something, we tend to find it. We tend to see it. And so if we go into this with the attitude of things are hard, but what are the opportunities here? What are the things that I can see that I can try new, that I can do differently within my own life? We'll be more likely to see those opportunities. So personally, like what are your opportunities? And then within your organization too, how can you do things differently now that we're in this situation that nobody would have chosen to be in, but we're potentially going to be here for a little while. So what are the opportunities?
Yeah. And I think for me, some practical advice would be, from an organizational standpoint, is, first of all, be the proponent of keeping the focus on customer experience and use that as an advantage. It's the racing car driver story, basically. Don't be the first organizations to start to cut back on it, because I think since the pandemic, should I say, we've seen, obviously, the American Customer Satisfaction Index drop to the lowest point in 17 years. That, again, for me, shows the advantage that there could be in still keeping on improving the customer experience. I think the other thing that I think is key is, typically, in my experience of organizations, is when organizations are hit with bad times, there is very much an inward focus, and that inward focus loses sight very quickly of the customer, and everybody starts worrying about their job. What are they doing? What's the organization doing? How are we going to get through this? So again, I would counsel you to be the voice that is continuing to talk about the customer. And I've just thought about this one, and I think this may be true. That, we've talked about in the past this whole area of customer science, yeah, and we've talked about in the past that, and we'll put a link to the customer science blog in the show notes. If you haven't listened to that, then do. I wonder whether this is going to be that inflection point that shifts the focus of customer experience to that more of a focus on customer science. I'm not going to go into the difference between those two. I would highly recommend you go back and listen to those podcasts. But I wonder if this will be that inflection point, because typically, when changes like these things, the recessions, etc., come around, the pandemic comes around, they are inflection points, aren't they? And change happens that then sticks, basically. Think of hybrid working in the pandemic, and that type of stuff. So anyway, so we hope that's been of use. We look forward to talking to you next week. And please, as I said before, look us up on YouTube, and please do us a review. That would be really great. Look forward to talking to you next week. Cheers.